mean, I guess I could have done it by myself. Been slightly more boring. Anyway, let me pull this up here. All right. At least I can see that you're typing, so that's good. So I'll keep an eye on that. Luckily, I'm in my office, so I have two screens, so I can look at the screen with the study guides and also see if you type anything. So if you have any questions as I'm going, just type it out and let me know, or hit that little hand raise button and let me know, and then I'll stop and answer your question. Otherwise, I'm just going to steam right through this. And hey, Asbury's joined us. That's good. So Asbury, we are recording, and like I was just telling Rice, if you have questions, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to be rolling through this, answering all the questions and explaining why this is correct, why this is incorrect, whether this is going to be definitely on the exam or maybe on the exam or definitely not on the exam, whatever the case may be. All right, here we go. Well, once I get my screen shared here, I'm waiting on it to share my screen. Can you? There we go. Should be working here in a second. Can someone confirm? I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry, guys.
No, I always make the joke. Technology is great when it works, and 9 times out of 10 it doesn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, now can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit here. All right. Here we go. The common house mouse species Mus musculus has the following taxonomic classification: Mus, Muridae, Rodentia, Mammalia, Chordata, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Which part of the name is the family? So I like this question. You'll probably have it on the exam. Of course, I'll change the species. But the reason I like it is because it requires you to know two things. First of all, you need to know that this is the species name, right? You need to recognize that and say, oh, yeah, that's a species name. I wonder if I can italicize it yet. Oh, good. Anyway, so you need to recognize that as the species name. And then you have to know that the first part of the species name is the genus, and the second part is the species. And then you have to know the order of the way, it goes. So, we know this is the genus, right? Muscalis. So we know that's the genus. Therefore, here's the classification. We know that's the genus. We know Eukarya is the domain. So we know we're going from more specific to less specific, meaning we're going from species, genus, right? You could go up that way or down, right? Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, right? So that's basically what you need to know. You need to know that, and then you can use that to figure the answer to this out. So it's asking what part is the family. So again, I'm just going to start from the top because that's how I have it memorized. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family. So the answer is Muridae. Any questions about that? All right. And again, you don't need to memorize this because if you get this question on the exam, it'll be a different species. I might even make up a species because the point is I don't want you to memorize anything. I want you to be able to figure something out. You need to know the whole idea of, again, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Any questions about that one? All right. Blank believed that the use or lack of use of body parts enabled individuals to develop certain traits that it passed along to its offspring, while blank believed that these species are fixed forms. I probably won't ask this because, like I said, when I brought it up, this isn't a history class, but the answer, Lamarck, is the one that believed if you used it or didn't use it, that would make a difference. Sort of like he believed that giraffes have long necks because they've been stretching their necks for generations. But Aristotle believed that, species are fixed and they don't change over time. But again, that one probably won't be on the exam. Any questions about that one? All right. Natural selection can be defined as what? The evolution of a population of organisms. That sounds good. That is not an incorrect thing. A process in which changes in gene frequencies results from evolution. Yeah, again, not necessarily incorrect, but that's a better description of microevolution. The production of more offspring that can survive a given environment. No, that's part of natural selection, but that isn't a definition of natural selection. So the answer here, the correct answer is the process in which organisms with certain inherited traits are more likely to survive. This is directly from your textbook. If I were to write this, the correct option would have more to it, because just being able, well, no, it's in there. Inherited traits. So there's the keys there, right? Inherited traits and likely to survive, pass along, and have more offspring, things like that. So I don't like the way this one's written. It probably won't be on the exam. Any questions about that one? All right. Natural selection results in evolutionary adaptation. That is true. Very rare. That is not true. Does not affect allele frequencies. That is not true. Prepares an organism for future changes in environment. Future, making that the wrong option. So the answer is A. Results in evolutionary adaptations. Now I could change this to say prepared organisms, like past tense, prepared with a D, prepared organisms for current changes, or for the current environment. And yes, natural selection has prepared current organisms for the current environment, but this whole idea of the future is not true. Like, it probably will work in the future. Anyway, I also don't like the wording of that one, so now that I'm thinking about it, it might not be on the exam either. Any questions about that one? All right, the first basic idea of evolutionary adaptation can be traced back to Lamarck, like we just talked about earlier. And again, I'm probably not going to ask that question either, because this is in a history class. Any questions about that one? But again, just to remind you, the Greeks thought nothing changed, including Aristotle. Lamarck was the first one to say, hey, evolution might be a thing. It was Darwin who figured it out, but Lamarck figured out how it worked. But Lamarck was the first person that we know of that thought things do evolve. Which of the following statements about the voyage of the Beagle is true? Let's just skip that. It's not going to be on the exam. During his trip on the Beagle, Darwin found, this one's kind of important, so I might be on the exam. Plants and animals living on temperate regions were most similar to each other, regardless. Well, if I could see it, that would be nice. Okay, regardless of the continent on which they were found. No, that was opposite of true, because what we said was this right here. Plants and animals living on the continent seemed more closely related to each other than plants and animals living in similar regions, like in this example up top, temperate regions, on other continents. In other words, the important thing here is that geographic proximity is more important than anything else as far as the similarities. That's what he found out, right? So he was looking at the deserts of South America, and then he was also looking at the rainforests of South America, and he saw more similarities between those animals than he did, for example, from the deserts of South America versus the deserts of Australia. Those animals were a lot different, despite living in the same type of environment, right? So again, geographic proximity is more important. So any questions about that slide? While on the Beagle, Darwin was influenced by a book by Charles Lyell that suggested the Earth was old and sculpted by geological processes that continue today. So A is the correct answer there. It's pretty simple. Any questions about that? This one's really easy. In the Origins of Species, which is the book he wrote, Darwin argued that the mechanism of descent with modification was, and the answer is natural selection. So remember, evolution, there's all different types of evolution, but the big one that we talk about is natural selection. So it was Darwin that figured out natural selection. He figured out that was the main cause of evolution. There are others, but natural selection was the big one. So any questions about that one? All right, which of the following is a component of the fossil record? The distribution of organisms? No, because they're alive. The similarity of forelimbs of cats and bats? No, those are homologies. Molecular sequences? No, those are also homologies, but they're molecular homologies. And then the bones of extinct whales, and the thing there is bones. So you might get a question like this, but keep in mind, I'm going to change the words around, so it might not be bones. Just go back at the textbook or the lecture and just look at all the different types of fossils: bones, imprints, fossilized poop, petrified wood, things like that. Any questions about that side? That question. Any questions about the question? All right, the whales, we're going to skip that thing because those were part of that whole process of science. And like I always say, I don't ask questions about that. Homology is evidence of common ancestry. So remember, homology, like I just mentioned earlier up there, It's basically when two things are the same, right? So the molecular homology example I gave was vitamin C, right? So all mammals, for the most part, other than primates, can make vitamin C. But we primates, even though we have the gene for it, our gene is broken. So that is evidence that we have a common ancestor with primates, because every other mammal can make the vitamin C because their gene is not broken. But our common ancestor that we share with primates, must have had that broken gene. And then once that common ancestor split into other species, that gene went with it. Anyway, that's just an example. Again, homology is the evidence of common ancestry. And there's not many ways I could reword that for the exam. Any questions about this slide? This question. All right. Speaking of homologies, which of the following are homologous? I don't necessarily like this question. I don't know if I'm going to have it on the exam or not, but forelimb of a dog and hind limb. All right, doesn't matter. Okay, this is not an answer, because you're comparing the forelimb, which is like the arms, and the hind limb, which are like the legs. So those are completely different things. Forelimb, here we go. Forelimb of a dog and forelimb of a cat. So there we go. That is a homology, right? Because that's something they have in common. Unlike the wings of a butterfly and wings of a sparrow, because sparrows and butterflies, it's not like they have one common ancestor, and that's where wings came from one common ancestor. It doesn't work like that. Same with this. Here again, we're comparing a bird with an insect, and it's not like they have a common ancestor where they had mouths. But again, I don't really like this question. It probably won't be on the exam. Any questions about that question? All right, the similarity of embryos. We can just leave it at that, really. The similarity of embryos of a bunch of different things is evidence of common ancestry. So homologies, like we talked about earlier, that's evidence that we share a common ancestor, and so is the way our embryos look. And hopefully you can remember the picture, what it looked like on the PowerPoint slide, how like all of our embryos basically look the same at one point, and that is evidence of common ancestry. Any questions about that? All right, natural selection generally results in this one: a population that is adapted to its current environment. One could argue B is correct, because if natural selection works the way it's supposed to, then it will be adapted to its current environment. But what this option is saying is that the population is currently adapted to its future environment. So that'd be like saying the squirrels on WVSU's campus are adapted now for what it's going to be like in 200 years, which isn't correct, right? That's not how it works. And this is the question that this is the wrong answer that most people usually choose. Genetic variation is good. Usually natural selection is good. But as you know, sometimes natural selection does not result in increased genetic variation, because remember, there was something called, and we're going to talk about this later in the study guide, stabilizing selection, right? So remember there's that bell curve. So you have like the phenotypes. That's when you have more of the middle phenotype and even less of the extreme phenotypes. So that would be less genetic variation. And of course, the increased size in the population, not necessarily either, because, well, I don't have time to talk about it. But yeah, so the correct answer is a population that is adapted to its current environment. Any questions about that? Which of the following is not a requirement of natural selection? Gene flow. Gene flow is a different type of evolution, right? Natural selection is a type of evolution. Gene flow is a type of evolution. Genetic drift is a type of evolution. So that, obviously, gene flow is not a requirement. You do need differential reproductive success, right? That means, for some reason, this organism has more success reproducing than the other organism. You need that for a natural selection. You do need an overproduction of offspring, because that's that struggle to survive, to where only the strongest survive, right? The survival of the fittest. And of course, you need genetic variation, because if everything was the same, then there's nothing to select from. So yes, this question might be on the exam. If I do, obviously I'm going to change gene flow to something else, because I'm going to change it. So just think, basically what you need to focus on are these three things, right? Just think about all the requirements for natural selection. Make sure you understand what those are. Any questions about that? All right. Which of the following statements is true? Natural selection works on variation already present in the population. Yep, that is correct. If I were to write this on the exam, I might change that to make it the incorrect option and say something like, natural selection works on variation that will be present in the population, right? Again, the future thing. That doesn't do us any good. So that could make that wrong. This one could say natural selection works on heritable traits. If I change that to heritable, then that would be the correct option. If I change this to say individuals do not evolve through natural selection, then that would be correct. Because remember, individuals don't evolve. No single individual evolves. Populations evolve, right? Because certain individuals live longer or they don't live longer. And that's what helps evolve the population. But individuals do not evolve. And same thing here. I could change this to say individual organisms do not evolve structures that they need, in which case that would be the correct answer. Any questions about that question? Okay. Which of the following is a population? So remember, we're talking about a group of organisms. They're the same species. They're in the same place at the same time. They're interbreeding. They're dealing with the same forces. All right, so let's look at the options. All the termites infesting your house along with the microorganisms living in your gut. Nope, that describes a community because we have two different species there. Termites and the things living inside of them. So that's not a population. That's more than one species. All the termites that have ever lived. No, that is one species, but think about it. You can't talk about species termites that used to live because they're not currently alive. They're not dealing with the same thing. They're not interbreeding or interacting. All the organisms living in your house. No, again, that would be more like a community because that's more than one species. So here we go. The correct answer is the termites infesting your house. They're all alive. They're the same species. They're in the same area at the same time. That's the answer. Of course, for the exam, I'm going to change it. It won't say termites. So the key to it is looking for a group of organisms that are of the same species at the same place at the same time. Any questions about that? All right. Which of the following can create new alleles? And the simple answer is mutation. There's not much else I can say about that. And I can't even change that up much. So if it's on the exam, I can't imagine how much more I can change it. I might be able to change some of the wrong answers, but mutation is the answer, and it's not many ways I can change the wording of that question. So any questions about that? And again, this is a good time to remind you, hopefully at this point you don't need this reminder, you or anybody watching the video, but alleles, those are different versions of genes, right? So you either have an allele for a smooth chin or you have an allele for a dimple chin. It's the same gene, different versions. The total collection of alleles in a population at any one time, that is a gene pool. That's what a gene pool is, right? So all the genes, all the different versions of all the genes of all the individuals of the same species, right? That's what a population is. So any questions about that? If the frequency of one allele in a population is 0.7, let me start over. If the frequency of one allele in a population is 0.7, in a population with two alleles at a particular locus, what is the frequency of the alternate allele? So remember, again, this is basically the Hardy-Weinberg formula without giving it. P plus Q equals 1, right? This is basically percentages, right? So 70% is one allele. Obviously, 30% has to be the other allele because 70 plus 30 equals 100%, right? Or if we're talking about frequencies instead of percentages, 0.7 plus what equals 1? 0.7 plus 0.3 equals 1. Make sense? Well, you have a better question is, do you have any questions about that? All right. So remember, for the exam, I'm going to change the numbers up, but it's still a pretty simple thing. If we're just talking about two alleles, right, they both have to add up to 1. So it could be 0.5 and 0.5, or it could be like this one, 0.7 and 0.3, or it could be 0.75 and 0.25, whatever it is, right? It always has to add up to 1. And the Hardy-Weinberg formula was P squared represent. So remember, that was P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. So it's, again, sort of like this, but instead of looking at allele frequencies, we're looking at genotype frequencies. So homozygous dominant versus heterozygous versus homozygous recessive. So the answer to this is the frequency of homozygotes for one allele. Yeah, that's not much else to say about that. So, any questions about that question? On the same note, in the Hardy-Weinberg formula, what does 2pq represent? And that is simply the frequency of heterozygotes. That's just something you have to memorize. I don't have a good way to help you memorize it, but that's what it is. Any questions? All right. The original source of genetic variation that serves as the raw material for natural selection. This question was already asked in different words. The answer is mutation. Right? Mutation is the original source of genetic variation. So at one point in our human history, there was no such thing as sickle cell. Then one day in Africa, there was a mutation, and somebody had that mutation, and then their blood cell was misshaped, and because of that, they were less likely to get malaria. Therefore, they were more likely to survive. Therefore, they were more likely to reproduce. Therefore, that gene got passed along more than anyone else's gene, and therefore, sickle cell became a more common thing in the population. Any questions about that? All right. Which of the following is a characteristic of a population at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? I probably won't ask this because this is a really academic question, because in all honesty, things really don't even really get to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium when you really think about it. But anyway, let's talk about it just in case it is on the exam. And the answer is the population is not evolving. That's what it means. When it's at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, that means none of the allele frequencies are changing. None of the genotype frequencies are changing, right? So that means it's not evolving. Of course, if I were to have this question on the exam, I could change this to be the incorrect answer by saying the population is evolving. And I could change this to the correct answer by saying the population is not subject to natural selection. And I could put this as the correct answer by saying genetic drift is not occurring. Or this could be correct by saying gene flow in and out of the population is not occurring. Any questions about this slide? Question. All right. Genetic drift is the result of chance. That's all it is. So just like the chin dimple, right? There's no advantage or disadvantage for humans to have a chin dimple. But I bet if we could somehow figure out everybody on Earth, get the numbers, like what percentage of people on Earth have a chin dimple versus what percent don't, I guarantee you that percentage changes. Every 10 years, that number must change a little bit. Not because there's an advantage or disadvantage to having the chin dimple, just by chance. By chance, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. That's what genetic drift is. Any questions about that? All right. Which one of the following will prevent significant genetic drift? The population size is large. That's basically it. And I could go on and talk about that, but we don't really have the time. Just think about, though, like to make big numbers, like to change the percentages of something. If you have 10 people, like we did in some of our labs, then if you change one person, then that's a 10% increase, right? So that's a big change. But if you have 8 billion people, then one person changing is not even going to register, basically. So yeah, the population size is large. That's the answer. Any questions about that? All right. After surviving a bottleneck, a population recovers to the point where it consists of as many individuals as it did prior to the bottleneck. So let's say there was 100,000 cheetahs in a population, and then there was a bottleneck, and most of them died out. But here we go. They've recovered, and we now have 100,000 cheetahs again. Which of the following statements is most likely to apply to this population? And there's the correct answer. The post-bottleneck population exhibits less genetic variation than the pre-bottleneck population. So even though it's the same numbers of individuals as it used to be, there's less genetic variation. That's what happens in a bottleneck, right? You lose so much of your genetic variation. And I used the example of humans with COVID, right? So I don't have time to talk about it. You can look at that video if you want. Does anybody have any questions about bottleneck? All right. Speaking of which, the founder effect is different from a bottleneck. In which way, basically? And it's that this. It involves the isolation of a small colony of individuals from a larger population, which is why this is almost the correct answer. Can occur only on an oceanic island colony. That is, that does involve the isolation of a small colony from a larger population, but it can happen in other places. And the good example I gave for that, even though I did give a bunch of island examples, was the Amish community, right? The Amish community is not geographically isolated from the rest of us, but their genetics are different than the rest of us. They have certain ailments that are more, not more likely, yeah, more likely. Yeah, there's a higher frequency of those, a higher percentage of those ailments in their population because there was a founder effect. There was a relatively small amount of people that founded the Amish community, and they are isolated from the rest of us, right? Not geographically, but culturally, they're isolated. So there's not a lot of interbreeding between the Amish community and everyone else. Any questions about that? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, which of the following is the most likely explanation? Oh, here we go. Speaking of the Amish community, which of the following is the most likely explanation for a particular human population with a higher incidence of polydactyly, which is what the Amish do have? There's a higher percentage of people with extra digits in Amish people among as compared to the rest of the population. And the answer is, again, founder effect. Because just by chance, the people that founded the Amish community had a slightly higher percentage of people with polydactyly, and it's stuck. Now that's set the course for the rest of their evolution. Any questions about that? Gene flow. What's in the name? It's accomplished by what? Migration, right? Genes flowing in and out of a population as organisms migrate into or out of that population. Pretty simple. Any questions about that? All right, what does evolutionary fitness measure? This one's pretty simple and straightforward. It's simply relative reproductive success. So this is why I like to really harp on that word, survival of the fittest. It's okay to use it every once in a while as long as you understand that it's not just about survival. If you survive, like let's say there's some kind of mutation in I don't know, lions, right? There's a mutation in lions, some population of lions, and this mutation just makes these things beasts, like more than they already are. They're faster, they're meaner, they're harder to kill. But that same mutation that made them really good at survival also makes them sterile, right? So that's not good for evolutionary fitness. Yeah, it might make that one individual survive, but that mutation is not going to get passed along because it made them sterile. So again, evolutionary fitness, it's all about reproductive success. So if in your mind you keep thinking of survival of the fittest, then take it the next step further. Yes, survival is important, but why is it important? Because it leads to more reproduction. Any questions about that? All right, which of the following is an example that results from directional selection? So remember, directional selection is when the population, you look at a particular trait in a particular population and you're moving towards one of the extreme phenotypes. So if humans were a lot taller, if humans keep getting taller every 100 years, that would be directional selection. Or if humans keep getting smaller, that would be directional selection in the other direction. Anyway, that being said, let's look at these options. The birth weight at which newborn humans are most likely to, no, that's not it. Increase in antibiotic resistance, that's a good option. Increase in the different number of breeds of dogs, no, that would be more like disruptive selection. So yeah, there's an increase in antibiotic resistance. But let me tell you this, if you get this question, and you probably will on the exam, my options are going to be less ambiguous. I hate these options. They're stupid. So mine are going to be really, really obvious. So again, just using humans as an example, if it's directional selection, that means it's going to be, there's going to be more taller people or more shorter people, right? Because you're going in one direction or the other. Any questions about that? All right. Which one of the following? All right. Basically the same question, but now we're talking about disruptive selection. So remember, disruptive selection is where there's two ways you can look at it. You're having more of the extremes, but you're having fewer of the middle. So again, using humans as an example, that would mean you have, in 100 years, you have more taller people than you have now, more shorter people than you have now, but fewer average people. Does that make sense? Or does that not make sense, I should say? Do you have questions about that? So again, for disruptive selection, you're getting both of the extreme phenotypes are increasing, but that middle, the average, is decreasing. And the opposite of that, we'll come back to that. Which of the following is most likely to decrease genetic variation? That would be the opposite of this. The opposite of disruptive selection is directional selection. So again, using humans as an example, if there was stabilizing selection, stabilizing selection would decrease genetic variation. So again, using humans as an example, in 100 years, that would be like saying we still have, the average human is still 5'6", but now there's even more average humans and even fewer tall people and even fewer shorter people, right? So you're getting rid of the extremes and getting more of that average. So again, that is why it's like the opposite of disruptive selection. So obviously, if you're getting rid of the extremes and you're getting more towards like the average, that would be stabilizing selection. You would have less genetic variation. Any questions about that? All right, which of the following examples results from stabilizing selection? So here we go again. And again, I'm just not even going to talk about this because these options they give are horrible. So again, if the humans, like the average human, if we had more of the average human and fewer shorter humans and fewer taller humans, that would be stabilizing selection. Any questions? All right, which is an example of sexual selection? Bacteria evolve resistance to antibiotics. That's natural selection. That's a bottleneck. It's right there in the name. Peahens choosing to mate with peacocks that have the most beautiful tails. That is sexual selection. There is no other advantage to peacocks having big, beautiful tails. It's actually bad for their survival because it makes them more visible to predators. It makes them harder to get away from predators. So for that reason, it is sexual selection. It is a female selecting that male to mate with. That makes it sexual selection. Obviously, I'm going to change the examples in the exam if it's on there, but yeah. And this is the reason this one's not sexual selection. It involves sex. The saying females have a higher survival rate than males. That involves sex, but sexual selection, again, is when there's a trait that's chosen for the purpose of breeding, right? That's whatever trait it is, and it's usually the female choosing the male because of whatever trait it may be. Any questions about sexual selection? All right, again, there will be no questions about the whale stuff. That was skipped during the lecture, and that is the end of Chapter 13. Are there any questions about Chapter 13 before I move on to Chapter 19? All right, nice and easy.
So this is totally like off topic, but as I was walking into my house, there was a lizard. And the first thing, like, you started talking about animal selection, and I was like, this is like scary because it was perfect timing.
I love it. Well, that'd be maybe one question too you won't miss on the exam because now it's wired a little bit harder into your brain.
Yeah. Like, it was, at first I thought it was a snake, and I was like, yep, nope, I'm just going to stay in my car. And then when I saw the tail, I was like, okay, I'm safe. We're good.
Yes, snakes or lizards are generally less scary than snakes. I love it. Maybe you can identify it. Write a paper about it. Anyway, here we go. We're almost there. Let me pull this up. There we go. Share my screen. Chapter 19 study guide. We've already said this, but what is a population? It's a group of individuals of the same species, right? A single species that occupies the same general area at the same general time. And we already talked about that with the whole termites infesting your house thing, right? So it's just one species at the same place at the same time. Of course, I could change this to be the correct answer by saying, well, never mind. No. Yeah, that's it. That's the correct answer. The reason A isn't correct is because it says a group of organisms, right? So that's a community. That's not a single species necessarily. It doesn't say that. Obviously, growth rate has nothing to do with what a population is. We do study the growth rate of populations. That was basically what Chapter 19 was about. But that in itself is not what a population is. So any questions about that? All right. Which of these is a characteristic of type 1 survivorship. Sorry, I got distracted for a second. Low survivorship for the very young? No, that's a type 3 type 3. Most individuals survive to older ages. Yes, that is type 1 survivorship. Just think about humans. Yeah, we do lose humans, to childbirth. We do have people who do die before they get old, but for the most part, humans mostly live to be old, and that is a type 1 survivorship. And hopefully the way you can remember that is this is all arbitrary, right? So some human decided to call it this. So obviously we would call it type 1 if it describes us as opposed to type 2 or type 3. Any questions about that? All right. Speaking of type 1 survivorship, type 1 survivorship curves are typical of a species that exhibits what? So again, if you're thinking type 1, just think about humans. There's other examples, but we are humans, so that's the easiest to think of. An intermediate number of offspring? No, we have a relatively few number, and we have relatively good parental care, so that's not it. Few offspring and good parental care. There's the correct answer. Many offspring and good parental care doesn't exist, generally speaking. And many offspring and poor parental care would be a type 3 survivorship. So again, the correct answer to this, because it says type 1 survivorship, is B. If it said type 2 survivorship, then the correct answer would be A. And if it said type 3 survivorship, then the correct answer would be D. And again, generally speaking, if there's any species that have many offspring, relatively a lot of offspring, then they generally don't have good parental care. So any questions about that? All right, it's a good segue into this next one because we've already talked about it a little bit. Type 2 survivorship. Which one of these best describes it? There's a high survivorship for the very young. Nope, that's us. That's type 1. Most individuals survive to older age intervals. No, that's us, type 1. Survivorship is constant over the lifespan. Yes, that is type 2. Survivorship is constant over the lifespan. Or again, I could say there's an intermediate number of offspring with an intermediate level of parental care would also suffice right there. But anyway, also too, if this asked what a type 3 survivorship is, then this would be the correct answer. Survivorship is high for the few individuals that survive. That's type 3. So you can see all the different ways I could answer it. As written, for a type 2 survivorship, a constant survivorship is the correct answer. Speaking of which, type 3 survivorship, there's a high survivorship for the very young. No, again, that's type 1. Most individuals survive to an older age. Nope, again, that's type 1. Survivorship is constant, like I just said previously. That's type 2. So the correct answer is survivorship is high for the few individuals that survive to a certain age. And again, I could throw in something from up here to discuss. There's different ways to describe it. So again, many offspring and poor parental care is also a way that we could describe type 3 survivorship. So you should study all those questions together. Anyway, are there any questions about the survivorship questions? All right. Opportunistic species typically exhibit type 3 survivorship. So that's what makes that incorrect. It's not type 1. It's type 3. Reach sexual maturity slowly. That's not it because that's another way of describing type 1. Very long living. Nope. That is also another way of describing a type 1 survivorship or an equilibrial life history. So here we go. They have a large number of offspring. Opportunistic species typically have a large number of offspring because generally, basically, you could even write a little note card as far as we're concerned for studying. Opportunistic species equals type 3 survivorship. So any way you could describe a type 3 survivorship is another way you could describe an opportunistic species. Any questions about that? All right. So the opposite is true. If we're talking about an equilibrial life history, that's the opposite of a opportunistic. So the opposite of a type 3 survivorship would be a type 1 survivorship. So just think about all the ways you could describe a type 1 survivorship. That's the same way you could describe an equilibrial life history. So have long lives? Yes, that is the correct answer. Species that have an equilibrial life history have relatively long lives. Obviously, they don't have a type 3 survivorship or a type 2 survivorship because I just told you it's type 1. And no, they don't have a large number of offspring because that is typical of a type 3 survivorship. So for this exam, I could change this to say have short lives and make that the wrong answer. And I could change this to say have a small number of offspring to make that the correct answer. Or I could change this to say exhibits a type 1 survivorship and make that the correct answer. So hopefully you guys can see all the different ways I could change the questions. Basically, you need to know what makes a type 1, a type 2, and a type 3 survivorship. And then you also need to know opportunistic, as far as we're concerned, is the same as type 3. And equilibrial, as far as we're concerned, is the same as type 1. All right. Any questions about that? Okay. There are 500 oak trees in a forest covering 50 square miles. The population density is what? So we're looking for per square mile. So hopefully you can see this. And you're allowed to have calculators, though you might not need it. This is pretty simple, but I'll show you how to do it. Right? So I'm trying to pull it up for you guys. It's not working, is it? Come on. Sorry. Computer stinks. So again, this should be pretty easy, but if you needed a calculator, I'll just show you the equation. It's 500. Oops. 50. 500, because that's how many of them are, divided by however much area, so 50 square kilometers, and that gives you 10 trees per square kilometer. And again, you probably don't need a calculator for that, and if I do have a question like that on the exam, the math will be that easy. And of course, you could work it backwards if you don't like dividing. You could just say, all right, 10 times 50 is 500, right? Any questions about that? All right, in an ideal unlimited environment, a population's growth follows what kind of growth model? If it's undeal, good grief. Ideal in an unlimited, then it's exponential. It's just that simple. It's that J-shaped graph, right, where the population just explodes. This is going up and up and up. That is an exponential growth model. Any questions about that? All right. In an ideal unlimited environment, so again, here we are talking about exponential growth here. What shape does the population's growth curve most closely resemble? Like I say, it's a J, right? Because it's just going up and up and up and up. Unlike an S, right? The J, eventually, as it slows down and starts going straight, that would be an S. But right now, as it's just going up and up and up, that's a J. The other two are just garbage there meant to distract you. Any questions about that? All right, if a population's growth rate decreases as the population size approaches carrying capacity, which is, again, just the highest number of individuals that the environment can sustain, the population's growth follows what kind of model? And it is logistic. So that's basically it, right? You have exponential or logistic. And they're all exponential at first. The population explodes, like we just talked about, but then it starts evening out. Once it is evened out, that is the logistic growth model. Any questions about that? So basically the same question. If you're talking about logistic growth model as opposed to exponential, then what does the graph look like? And it's an S shape, right? It starts off as that J. It starts off going up, but then it evens out, and that gives you that S. Any questions about that? Blank is the maximum population size that a particular habitat can support. We just used the word up there, and I defined it when I said it, and it is the carrying capacity. As the maximum population size that a particular habitat can support. And there's not much I could change if I were to put this on the exam. So now that I'm thinking about it, if I put it on the exam, I might do it the other way and say carrying capacity is what? And then have these as the option. So it might say something like the minimum population size that a population, or the average population size, right? And the key here in that case would be the maximum population size that a particular habitat can support. Any questions about that? All right. According to the logistic growth model, what happens to a population when the size of the population reaches carrying capacity? Well, it just goes to zero, right? The growth rate hits zero. Of course, we know in all actuality, because again, we're talking about the model. That's what it's predicted to do. But in all actuality, it fluctuates above and below a little bit above and below the carrying capacity. But generally speaking, the growth rate is zero. Any questions about that? And again, to remind you, when I say the growth rate is 0, that just means whatever population size it's at, that's where it's staying. Doesn't mean the population is getting smaller. So if humans hit carrying capacity today for some reason, then that means our human population would hover right around 8 billion forever, right? It's not going up or down. It's just the rate is 0, and that's where we're at right now is about 8 billion. Any questions about that? All right, competition among individuals of the same species is what? And there's the key. We're talking about the same species, so that makes it intra-specific. Because if it was inter-specific, that would be between different species. If it's intra-specific, it's the same species. Any questions about that? All right. Which of these factors operates on a population in a density-dependent manner? So again, this is something where the population density matters. A blizzard doesn't matter. A blizzard is just going to kill everything, presumably. It would just kill everything, whether there's 5 squirrels on WVSU's campus or 100 squirrels on WVSU's campus. If the blizzard is bad enough, it's just going to kill all of them. It doesn't matter how many there are. Same thing with a volcanic eruption, right? I don't care if you have 100 palm trees on that volcanic island or 1,000 palm trees on that volcanic island. If the whole thing is covered in lava, they're all going to die. It doesn't matter what the population density is. Food supply, that's the correct answer. Because if you have 5 wolves on some island on the Great Lakes, and there's a certain food supply, but then you have 100 wolves on the same island with the same food supply. Obviously, that's going to matter, right? Density. That's why it's density dependent. It does matter. So food supply is that, but remember, it could be something else like accumulation of toxic waste or disease transmission, right? Any questions about density dependence? All right. Over time, the population of most species fluctuates. I like that your book included this because, we talk about logistic growth and exponential growth, but in all actuality, it fluctuates, right? It doesn't always follow the model exactly as it should. Sometimes populations do an boom and bust, but generally speaking, most populations just fluctuate. If it was continuously increasing, that would be exponential. But anyway, any questions about number 17? All right, an unexpected freeze that kills a population of chipmunks, that would be an example of density independent. Because again, it doesn't matter. Again, it's just say this, the chipmunks on WVSU's campus. If it gets so cold where it would kill a chipmunk, then it's going to kill all the chipmunks on WVSU's campus, whether there's 100 of them or 1,000 of them, doesn't matter. Whoops. Sorry. A, density independent, right? This is independent of the density. It doesn't matter how the density of the population. Doesn't matter. Any questions about that? Okay. So again, don't memorize this verbatim. It could be a different animal. It could be some other thing that killed them. But if it's density independent, then it has nothing to do with the population density. The Endangered Species Act aims to help protect species that are, well, this is pretty easy, in danger of extinction, obviously. That one's so easy, it probably won't be on the exam. That's a good question for maybe a 6th grade science class. All right, this is an example. I told you when I gave you that example, I wouldn't ask questions about it because I don't want you memorizing examples. So I'm just going to skip past that. You arrive back in the United States after having visited a foreign country located on another continent. The customs agent stops the person in front of you and confiscates the fruit basket this person is bringing home. Being the knowledgeable person you are, you can calmly explain to your enraged fellow traveler that the reason for this detainment is that the fruit basket may what? Carrying endangered fruit? Possibly, but that's probably not the most correct answer. Here we go. Carrying a non-native species that could damage North American ecosystems, right? We don't want you to bring something in that could destroy our ecosystems, that could become an invasive species. Anyway, any questions about that? Non-native species can have important effects on biological communities by what? Preying upon native species? Yes. but then they use the word only, so that's not it. Competing, yes, but not only. Reducing biodiversity, yes, but not only. So the answer is all of these are effects that non-native species can have on biological communities. And I'll go ahead and tell you, anybody who's watching, if I have this question on the exam, I'll probably switch it to where it isn't going to be one of these all of the above. I'll probably come up with a bunch of different options and only have one correct answer. But I will get rid of that word only to make it correct. All right, any questions about this slide? I'm not going to ask you any examples of invasive species. Here we go. The intentional release of a natural enemy to attack a pet's population is called biological control. It's pretty simple. It's in the name, right? When we use living things to take care of a pest, that's biological control, as opposed to chemical control, for example, like using pesticides or herbicides. So any questions about number 24? All right. Indian mongoose is a good example of how biological controls don't always work. But as I said in the lecture, I'm not going to test you on the examples. So let's move forward. Same thing here. Kudzu is a great example of an invasive plant, but I told you I'm not going to ask you any questions about it. Most crop pests have an opportunistic life history. It's that simple. That's just something you need to know. I don't know how else to explain it or give you any hints on ways to memorize it, but yeah, they have an opportunistic life history. Any questions about that? Okay, let me also say this. This is good test-taking strategy too, not just for this course, but any course. I like to call it one of these things is not like the other strategy. It doesn't always work, but very often it does. So equilibrial life history, right? That's a type 1 survivorship. Type 1 survivorship. Long-lasting, long-lived individuals, type 1 survivorship, right? So all three of these options describe a type 1 survivorship, except this one, so, right? That's the one thing that's not like the other, so that is the correct answer. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not always a good strategy, but if you're just looking at a question and you don't know the answer and if it's between one of these things is not like the other, or just picking a random question, then use that strategy. Any questions on 27? All right, 28, integrated pest management. What does it do? Favors overwhelming a pest with chemical pesticides? Incorrect. First of all, it doesn't favor overwhelming at all because it says, except a small number. And it's not just chemical pesticides. Like, that is part of it. That's hence the integrated, right? It's a bunch of stuff. Advocates total eradication of pest species? No, like I just said. It actually advocates dealing with a few of the pests, right? Not total eradication. Aims to keep the pest population on an exponential growth curve? No, that's not good either. It advocates mixed species planting and rotating crops. Yes, that is correct. So when you're studying this question, crack open your textbook and just read all the different things that integrated pest management does, because I'm probably not going to use the same example of mixed species planting. Any questions about integrated pest management? So again, before we move on, it's just a mixture of stuff, right? It is chemical pesticides. It is chemical herbicides. It is also biological control. And it is also cultural things like mixed species planting and rotating crops, things like that. Throughout most of human history, here we go. We talked about this today. The human population size did what? Grew very slowly. People are going to get this question wrong, and really, it doesn't make me that sad. This is one of those, I get it why they get it wrong, but they're probably going to answer skyrocketed, because when you think about the human population and what it's doing now, then skyrocketed is what you should be thinking. But the key here is most of human history, it grew very slowly. So any questions about number 29? Again, like we talked about today, in most developed countries, like United States, most places in Europe, as opposed to some place like Afghanistan or something like that, the overall population growth rates are this right here. They are near zero, so the population size is fairly stable, right? So the United States, our population size is fairly stable. I don't have time to talk about it, but yeah, that's the correct answer. Any questions about number 30? All right, let's talk about the opposite. So we're no longer talking about developed countries. We're talking about developing countries. These are just, in my opinion, It's almost just like a euphemism for saying poorer countries. In most poor countries, birth rates are high. So where is that? There we go. Birth rates are much higher than death rates, so the population is growing rapidly. So basically, in the poorer countries, they're kind of behind where the rest of us used to be, right? Because like I said earlier today, for all of humans, right, it used to grow very slowly. Then all of a sudden it skyrocketed because we started living longer, but we also still had a high birth rates. And that's where a lot of poorer countries are right now. So they're still having a lot of kids, but we're starting to fix their death rate problem. So therefore, their population is growing rapidly. Any questions about 31? All right. What will be the approximate shape of the age structure diagram of a rapidly increasing population? I didn't specifically say that in the lecture today, so I probably won't say it, but it's a pyramid. Because if it's a pyramid, that means, there's a lot of young people and fewer tall people or fewer older people, right? That gives it that pyramid shape. That would indicate, obviously, that they're having a lot of kids. So yeah, that probably won't be on the exam, but if it is, the answer is a pyramid. Any questions about that? All right, ecological footprint of the United States. This probably will be on the exam because not only have I said it, but you should know it from the lab. It shows that Americans consume a disproportionate amount of food and fuel. Or I can change this to be the correct answer by saying it is above the global average. Or I could change this one to say it is not lower than the global average, right? So again, we're above the global average, basically. We use more resources than the average human on Earth. Any questions about 33? All right. There will be no questions about the Pleistocene era. That is it for question 19. Study guide for chapter 19. Any questions about chapter 19? All right. Let's bring it to the last study guide. And also, let's talk about extra credit. So for you two who are here and anybody watching the video, when you get a really weird question on the exam, the answer is going to be sundown. Like, sunset, but sundown, when the sun is coming down. Like one of the titles of a Kings of Leon album. Of course, that's only part of the title, but anyway, any questions about that? All right. So here we go. Let me pull this up, and then I'll share my screen again. Screen. I'm also going to make sure I'm still recording. I'm going to cry real tears if this thing isn't recording. Okay, good. Here we go. You guys can see the screen, right? Or just let me know if you can't, I should say. All right, the present rate of species loss. I told you I wasn't going to ask you that, so we'll keep going. The single greatest threat to biodiversity, you do need to know that. That is habitat destruction. And remember, I told you the way you can remember that is, in a way, all the other options contribute to habitat destruction. Invasive species destroy the habitat, in a way. Overexploitation, right? You're cutting down a bunch of trees, for example, destroys the habitat, in a way. Pollution definitely destroys the habitat. So yes, the answer is habitat destruction. Any questions about that? Several years ago, I was crossing the border from Canada to the United States. I had a bag of Washington State apples with me. The customs officer at the border would not let me take the apples with me into the United States. Why did the customs officer refuse to allow it? And this is basically like the question you had in chapter 19. They just reworded it to be the different scenario, and it's specifically an apple instead of a whole fruit basket. But there's the answer. There may be a species that was not native to the United States hitching a ride, right? So again, it's all about not bringing in an invasive species. So any questions about that? All right. An example of mutualism. No, I'm not going to ask you. I told you in the lecture, I wouldn't ask you to memorize the specific examples I gave you. And these examples don't describe the relationship, right? It just says relationship between coral and algae. cryptic coloration, right? It's not describing it. So remember, in mutualism, if I were to ask, then I would explain the relationship, right? So I would say something about the corals have the algae living inside of them, and that the algae provides the coral with glucose, right? And that the coral provides the algae with protection and carbon dioxide and nitrogen, right? I would explain the situation, in which case you should recognize it as mutualism. If I describe any situation in which both of the species benefit from it, that's mutualism. So any questions about number 4? Populations of two coexisting species are both tertiary consumers in a community. What relationship may exist between the two organisms? So they're in the same spot, right? They're living in the same area, and they're in the same trophic level. So that means they are competitors. So I don't know, if you had like cheetahs and lions, in an African savanna, those would be competitors, right? Because they're both in the same trophic level. They're both trying to eat the gazelles or whatever it may be, right? So they're competing. Any questions about that? All right. As a result of a severe disturbance, a community. So here we're talking about a severe disturbance, not just some regular old disturbance. It's a big one. Community will undergo secession. So, for example, if a volcanic island it went off and everything was covered in lava and that hardened, so now you just have a big rock island where there used to be life, it would undergo secession, right? First you'd have little tiny plants, and then you'd have bigger plants, and life would eventually come back, but that is what secession is. So any questions about number 6? All right, here's an easy one. Organisms that consume producers are called primary consumers. And of course, anything that consumes the primary consumer is a secondary consumer. And anything that consumes a secondary consumer is a tertiary consumer, so on and so forth. So any questions about number 7? All right. In the food chain that goes grass, antelope, human, lion, the antelope is what? This is very simple. That is the primary consumer, right? Well, nope. Where are we at here? Herbivore and primary consumer, right? Because the grass is the producer, the antelope is the primary consumer. But the antelope could also be described as an herbivore. That's why it's herbivore and primary consumer. Any questions about that? And obviously, in the exam, if I give this question, the options would be different. It wouldn't be grass, antelope, human, and lions. It would be some other food chain. Again, in the same food chain, the human is what? Based on this, all right, so we have producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. So there you go. Secondary consumer is the answer. And in this case, the way this is written, lion would be the tertiary consumer because the lions would eat the humans. Any questions about number 9? All right. Next question is basically asking the same thing, except now we're looking at an aquatic environment instead of an environment on land. So small fish that eat zooplankton. And this is going to be harder for you guys to memorize. So we didn't give a lot of talk about this, but that would be secondary consumers. I probably want to ask this because we didn't talk too much about it. But the primary, the producers in an aquatic ecosystem are usually algae or something called phytoplankton. And the things that eat the phytoplanktons, those are the herbivores, and those are the primary consumers, and those would be the zooplanktons. So the things that eat the zooplanktons, well, obviously then would be the secondary consumers. But again, most likely I'm not going to ask this question because I don't feel like I gave that enough discussion during the lecture. Any questions about number 10? Okay, which of these converts organic matter to inorganic matter by breaking down dead organisms? That's simply a decomposer. There's not much else to say about that. A close second would be detritivores because those things eat dead things, but that's more like, again, like a vulture or a hyena. It's like eating a dead carcass. A decomposer is more of the microscopic level, like a fungi that's actually breaking down. We're talking about not just eating big chunks of an animal, but we're talking about breaking down molecules. So that's a decomposer. Any questions about number 11? And speaking of which, number 12, most decomposers are what? Fungi and prokaryotes. Which I don't like the way your book mentions that because as far as we're concerned, prokaryotes and bacteria are the same thing. So really it could say fungi and prokaryotes, or it could say fungi and bacteria. Again, as far as we're concerned, it's the same thing. Any questions about that? All right, bears eat berries, humans and large fish. So they eat a few things, right? Large fish eat smaller fish. They also eat insects. Humans eat bears. Humans also eat large fish and berries. Venus, blah, 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 so on and so forth. The point here is we don't have a nice clean line. This is not a food chain where one thing eats only one thing and that one thing only eats one other thing, because this is a food web. Any questions about that? All right, herbivory is an example of what? Obviously, it's a plus minus, right? The thing doing the eating is a getting the plus, and the thing being eaten is a minus. So herbivory is a plus minus interaction. It's pretty simple, not much else to say about that. Any questions about number 14? All right. There are exceptions to this, and I wish I had time to talk about it, but I don't. But really quickly, because this could be an independent work topic for you. When you think about it, you could argue that herbivory might also include eating the fruit of a plant. And in that case, that does nothing but help the plant. The whole purpose of a fruit is to spread the seed. And the seed's not going to get spread unless something eats the fruit, swallows the seed, and then poops it out somewhere, right? So you can make that argument for independent work if you want. Anyway, on to the next question. In order to assess the species diversity of a community, you would need to know the number of species present as well as what? So again, it's not just how many species are there, but also the relative abundance. And I used this example in lecture. If we had 100 people, and my numbers might be a little bit different, but if we had 100 people in the Hamblin Auditorium, and then one person brought a dog with them, and one person brought a cat with them, then we could say that there's 3 species in the Hamblin Auditorium. But it's not necessarily diverse, right? Because of the relative abundance. We have a whole lot of humans, and we only have one species and one of the other. So it'd be a little bit different if there was 33 humans and 33 cats and 33 dogs, right? That would be more diverse. Even though it's still only 3 species, the relative abundance is different. So any questions about number 15? Okay, in Yellowstone National Park, wolves were hunted to extinction in the 1920s. This is a true story. A current restoration project has reintroduced wolves to the Yellowstone National Park. Predict the response of the Yellowstone ecological community if wolves were a keystone species. So this question probably won't be on the exam, but you do need to know what a keystone species is. And that's where it's like, generally speaking, if you have a bunch of species, if you lose one, it's not that big of a deal, right? The more diverse the ecosystem is, the less important one single species is, unless it's a keystone species, because a keystone species makes a big deal, right? If you remove that one keystone species, then it's going to affect a lot of other species. So with that in mind, let's look at these options. Species richness should decrease. That's not true, because when you have the keystone when you lose the keystone species, that's when the species richness would decrease, right? So if you're introducing this keystone species back, then it should increase. Relative abundance should become more unequal, and that's not true. Again, when you have the keystone species, then you have better relative abundance, and you have more species richness, right? The number of species. Species diversity should decrease. That's, again, the opposite of true. It should increase. So the correct answer is species richness should increase, and the relative abundance of each species should also increase. Because, again, a keystone species, without it, biodiversity crashes, but with it, biodiversity increases, or at least is maintained. So any questions about number 16? All right, 2 lakes have the same number of species. All right, I basically already talked about this with the humans and Hamblin and the cats and dogs, but here we go. Most of the fish in Lake 1 are of a single species with a few individuals of the remaining species. Lake 2, on the other hand, has about equal number of species. Which lake has a higher species diversity? It would be Lake 2, right? Lake 2, on the other hand, has equal number of each species, right? So, again, scenario number 1, there's 100 humans, 1 dog, and 1 cat in Hamblin Hall. Scenario number 2, there's 33 humans, 33 cats, and 33 dogs in Hamblin Hall. Which one is more diverse? And the answer would be scenario number 2, right? Because you have an equal representation of the same number of species. So any questions about number 17? All right. What is one way in which energy flows different than chemical cycling? And basically, you just need to know energy flows through an ecosystem, and chemicals are recycled. With that in mind, let's look at the options. Energy flow is unidirectional. Yeah, that is another way of saying energy flows through the ecosystem. It comes in, goes out. Chemical elements can be recycled. So far, that's the best option. Energy can enter but cannot leave an ecosystem. That's not even true. I won't even read the rest of it. Energy flows from lower to higher trophic levels. Okay, we're on to something here. But cannot enter. A chemical cycle from higher to lower. So that part's not true. So the first part of this, C, is true. The second part is not true. So D, energy can both enter and leave an ecosystem. True. Chemical elements always remain within a single ecosystem. Not true, right? Because, the leaves in the forest ecosystem in Kanawha State Forest, some of them will fall into Davis Creek, which is a river ecosystem. So therefore, it's gone from one ecosystem to the other. The correct answer for 18 is A. Any questions about that? And of course, I could reword this to say energy flows through an ecosystem, and chemical elements can be, I could keep that the same way it is. But again, obviously, I'm going to change the wording up. It'll say the same thing in a different way. So make sure you're not memorizing these verbatim. Approximately what percentage of the visible light that reaches Earth's producers is converted to chemical energy? You know what? I'm not going to discuss that one because admittedly that is a little bit tricky because I said 1% of the light that hits us is actually converted, but then you have to think about the difference between what hits us versus what is actually converted. So I don't think I'm going to ask that one. Biomass is the total amount of blank in an ecosystem. Living stuff, basically. Living organic material in an ecosystem. So A is incorrect because it says consumers. That's too specific. B is incorrect because it says producers. That is too specific. C is specific to detritivores, right? Too specific. So it's all the living matter in an ecosystem. Any questions about that? All right. The rate at which an ecosystem's producers convert solar energy to chemical energy, that's just called primary productivity. There's not much to say about that one. Obviously, if we're talking about converting solar energy to chemical energy, then we're talking about producers, right? We're talking about plants usually. And if we're talking about producers, that's the only one that has producer in the name, right? Primary productivity. So that's the produce and productivity. But any questions about number 21? On average, what percentage of the energy in one trophic level becomes incorporated in the next one? You do need to know this. Only about 10%, right? So 90% of it is left where it is or it's lost in the conversion, right? So only 10% makes it from one level to the next. This is one of those numbers that you need to know. Any questions about number 22? Number 23, I showed you that graph that showed you which ecosystems had high primary productions and which had low primary productions, and I told you did not need to memorize that, so there will be no questions on that. Now, if I were to give you the graph, then you should be able to decipher it, but that's probably not going to happen. Why are most food chains limited to 3 to 5 trophic levels? Simply put, and before I even look at the options, it's because, again, you lose 10% or you only get 10% as you move up each trophic level. So, you're not going to have much energy left at the top. And also, you're going to require a lot of space to handle all that. So here we go. The higher trophic. Let's look at the options. Let's just talk about the correct one. There is insufficient energy to support more trophic levels. And that is correct, right? Because, again, only 10% makes it. Every time you move a step up, then only 10% of that energy makes it. So if you get up to level 5, that's a very small amount of energy. Let me see this really quick. Most ecosystems have insufficient space to support the increased number of organisms. That is also true. The nutritional quality of existing biomes decrease. No. The higher the trophic level, the larger the organism. Not always. The larger the organism, the less likely it will be to prey. So, yeah. The correct answer is D. But there's an argument to be made for C as well. So if I have this question on the exam, I'll probably get rid of C to make these options less ambiguous. Any questions about 24? All right, besides the atmosphere, abiotic reservoirs of carbon dioxide include what? And basically, we talked about this: fossil fuels and dissolved carbons in the ocean. If it's rocks that we're talking about, you should be thinking about phosphates. And it's not fossil fuels only, because it's also dissolved carbons in the ocean. So any questions about 25? All right, the atmosphere is approximately 80% nitrogen. Not much else to say about that. I just told you that's one of those numbers you need to know, and that's it. 90% or about 80% nitrogen. Any questions about 26? All right. 27. Plants can most readily utilize the blank form of nitrogen. So they can't take it out of the atmosphere, right? They can't use N2, which is the gas form. They can only usually use the nitrate. But I told you I wasn't going to ask you, because remember we said it took the N2 out, and then it converted into ammonia, and then it converted into ammonium. And I told you I wasn't going to ask you that. So, yeah, I'm not going to ask number 27. Just basically know that plants can't use the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere directly, right? It has to be converted to another form, and that's good enough. Speaking of which, and I told you I wasn't going to ask you this either, but what does that? What converts it? And it's usually bacteria that does that, nitrifying bacteria. But I'm not going to ask you that. Same thing here. I'm just going to skip it. I'm not going to ask you about that. The major abiotic reservoir for phosphorus, as I already said, is rock. It's just something you need to know. Rock is the major non-living reservoir for phosphorus. So not including living things. The biggest place that you're going to find phosphorus on Earth is in rocks. Any questions about number 30? All right. With regard to nutrient pollution in aquatic ecosystems, when is the worst time to apply fertilizer? I like this because I didn't ask this. I didn't teach this, but it requires some critical thinking. So if you're applying fertilizer to your yard, or if I'm applying fertilizer to my yard and I'm up the hill from the Canal River, which I am, then I don't want it running into the Canal River. So with that in mind, let's look at these options. When it's raining or is it about to rain? That is the worst time for me to apply my fertilizer because it'll just wash into the river, right? So that is the correct answer. Temperature, I didn't mention anything about temperature. Pesticides have nothing to do with this. Any questions about this? All right, one quick second. I have to text my boss because we have a meeting that started 17 minutes ago, and I need to tell them why I'm not there. All right, anyway. 32, the primary goal of conservation biology is to counter the loss of biodiversity. I probably won't ask that, but there you go. Any questions about 32? Modern conservation science increasingly aims at what? Countering biodiversity, sustaining entire ecosystem, maintaining genetic diversity. Maintaining genetic. Oh, no. Yeah, I'm definitely not asking this one. Then those two are too close. Even I got this one wrong. So 33 won't be on there. But we do want to sustain entire ecosystems. Why? Because we want to maintain genetic diversities within species. Now that I'm looking at it, I can see why C is correct. I'm sorry. This is too specific. We want to maintain genetic diversity within species, but we also want to maintain species diversity and ecosystems diversity. So D is just too specific. Any questions about 33? All right, species found in only one place on Earth are called what? Those are called endemic species. So if this was a partial credit question, which it won't be, then the only other options would be keystone or maybe exotic, because those are at least describing a species. Hotspot is not describing the species at all. It's describing the area. So anyway, any questions about 34? Sorry, my boss texted me back. Anyway, next one. Small areas that have large number of endangered and threatened species are referred to as what? And we were just talking about that. Those are called hotspots, specifically biodiversity hotspots. Any questions about that? All right. What's a step up from an ecosystem? That would be a bunch of ecosystems interacting with each other, and that is a regional assemblage of interacting ecosystems is called a landscape. Any questions about that? All righty then. Let me move forward. Landscape ecology, speaking of which, is the application of ecological principles to study land use patterns. That sounds right. Primarily on how to restore human altered ecosystems. That has some goodness to it. Deals primarily with ecosystems in urban settings. That's not correct. Range of different species. No. So this is one of those that might not be on the exam either, because A and B both sound really great. But if you look, the correct answer is A. The application of ecological principles to the study of land use patterns. Any questions about 37? All right, 38. A movement corridor is a path used by migratory animals, not always animals. So that might be wrong for that reason. When they move to their winter habitats, no, definitely not. That's way too specific. Is the path most commonly used by an animal within its home range? Again, too specific. Connects otherwise isolated patches of quality habitat for a species? Yes, that is the correct answer. Any questions about 38? All right. Speaking of movement corridors, number 39. Movement corridors are what? They are, let's see. B is too specific. A is too specific. C is kind of correct, except they can be harmful. This question definitely won't be on there because the correct answer, according to this, is D. But it should say, maybe this is just worded incorrectly. If this were to say can be harmful because they allow for blah, 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 right? If that said can be, then I would accept that. But it doesn't say can be. So I don't like that. Anyway, any questions about 39? Okay, sustainable development will require making difficult. I'm not going to ask you about that. E.O. Wilson, I'm not going to ask you about that. One problem with eradicating invasive species is that sometimes the disturbed area is unable to be called. I'm not going to ask you that either. Malaria is infectious disease, unicellular eukaryotic. That's too long. I'm not going to have any long questions that require you to like read one thing and then answer a bunch of questions. So none of those will be on it. Same with this. There's not going to be a section where you read one thing and then answer a bunch of questions, not unless I do it for extra credit. But so that's it. We have now covered all 3 study guides. Do you have any questions about the study guides or anything else to do with the final? All right. And again, as a reminder, I keep saying this, but someone's going to screw it up. The final will be online, just like every other exam has been. So keep an eye on your email. Keep an eye on Google Classroom. It's going to post by 8 o'clock at the latest. And it has to be turned in by 9:50 at the latest. All right. Doesn't matter if it opens up at 7. I don't care how long you can take as much time. You start it as early as you want, but make sure you end it at 9:50. Keep a phone with you, anything you can record, because if something goes wrong, I need a lot of evidence. If your power goes out or your Wi-Fi goes out or whatever the case may be, then make sure you take evidence. If you submit it at 9:50, which is like right when it's due, take pictures, take screenshots, because just in case you submit it on time, but then Google tells me you submitted it at 9:52, you're going to lose 20 points for being late. So if again, evidence is key, and I will be online if you guys need me, but you don't need to be online. And I guess that's it. Any questions? All right, then. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to post this video as soon as I can. And you're welcome. And you guys have a great weekend. I'll try my best to keep an eye on my email just in case you guys need me. And that's it.